My wife dug her nails into my hand under the table until I felt my skin break, leaned in with a smile she didn't mean, and whispered, "Don't speak tonight. You'll embarrass me in front of my family." Her father's eyes scanned me like I was trash someone forgot to throw out. Her mother lifted her wine glass just to hide the smirk on her face. Her brother didn't even try, he laughed under his breath, shaking his head at my cheap suit. In that moment, surrounded by people who wished I didn't exist, I swallowed my pride and stayed silent. But what happened next didn't just change the dinner. It changed every single person at that table forever. Hello, viewers. I hope you're doing well tonight, wherever you are in this world. Whether you're watching from your bedroom, your kitchen, maybe even lying awake when you should be sleeping, I'm glad you're here. This story is long, and it's raw, and it asks something difficult of you, your time, your attention, your willingness to feel something real. If you stay with me through this journey, I promise you won't regret it. And if this story moves you, please, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Subscribe if you haven't already. Stories like this need people like you to keep them alive. Now, let me take you back to that table. The chandelier above the private dining room cast shadows that made everyone look like they were performing in a play. Maybe they were. Julian Thorne, that was his name, though most people at this table barely used it, sat with his spine pressed against the velvet-backed chair, his hands folded in his lap where no one could see them shake. The restaurant was the kind of place where the menu had no prices and the waitstaff moved like ghosts, silent and efficient. Everything here cost more than Julian supposedly made in a month. At least, that's what they all believed. His wife, Vanessa, sat to his right, her diamond bracelet catching the light every time she reached for her champagne. She'd worn it specifically for tonight. Her father had given it to her on her 21st birthday, and she wore it like armor whenever she needed to remind herself, and Julian, which world she truly belonged to. Julian. Her father's voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a blade through silk. Richard Carrington, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, leaned forward with the kind of smile that never reached anywhere near warmth. "Vanessa tells me you're still working at that, what was it?" "Marketing firm." The way he said marketing firm made it sound like Julian cleaned sewers for a living. Julian felt Vanessa's hand tighten on his thigh under the table. A warning. He cleared his throat, tasting copper and shame. "Yes, sir." "Still there?" Richard lifted his scotch, studying Julian over the rim like he was an insect under glass. "And how's that treating you?" "Financially, I mean. Must be difficult in this economy, especially with..." His eyes drifted to Julian's jacket, a 2-year-old piece from a department store that Julian had worn because Vanessa said it made him look presentable enough. "Limited resources." Across the table, Vanessa's mother, Diane, made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but close enough. She dabbed at her lips with her napkin, her eyes glittering with something that might have been amusement or might have been contempt. "Probably both." "Dad." Vanessa's voice carried a note of forced lightness, the tone she used when she was trying to smooth over one of her family's barbs while secretly agreeing with it. "Julian's doing fine. We're doing fine." "Of course you are, sweetheart." Diane reached across to pat Vanessa's hand. "You've always been so resilient. So capable of making the best of all situations." The unspoken words hung in the air, situations like marrying beneath you. Julian's brother-in-law, Trevor, leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. He was younger than Julian by 3 years but carried himself like he'd already conquered the world. Which, in a sense, he had, at least the world that mattered to the Carringtons. "I just closed a deal last week," Trevor announced, though no one had asked. 8 figures. Took the client to Passaic, sealed it over dessert. His eyes slid to Julian with practiced cruelty. "You ever been to Passaic, Julian?" "No," Julian said quietly. "Didn't think so." Trevor's grin widened. "It's the kind of place where you need to book 6 months in advance. And, have the budget for it." He paused, letting that sink in. "What was it you said you do again?" "Something with social media." "Digital marketing," Julian corrected, his voice steady despite the heat crawling up his neck. Right. Digital marketing." Trevor said it like he was trying out a foreign language he didn't respect. Very modern. I'm sure that'll be relevant for another few years at least. Vanessa laughed, actually laughed, at her brother's joke. The sound hit Julian somewhere in his chest, sharp and unexpected. He looked at her, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. She was too busy smiling at Trevor, at her parents, at everyone except her husband. The waiter appeared then, a young man with kind eyes and careful hands. He set down the first course, some delicate arrangement of scallops and microgreens that probably cost more than Julian's car payment. "Your appetizers," he said softly, and when his gaze landed on Julian, something flickered there. Recognition? Respect? It was gone too quickly to name. "Thank you," Julian murmured. The waiter nodded, a slight inclination of his head that seemed more formal than the situation warranted, and disappeared back into the kitchen. Richard carved into his scallop with surgical precision. "You know what I admire about successful people, Julian? They don't settle. They don't accept mediocrity. They push themselves beyond their circumstances." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. Of course, some people are born with certain advantages. Connections. Background. The right kind of education. Another meaningful look. And some people have to work twice as hard to even get close. "I think Julian works very hard," Vanessa said, but her voice lacked conviction. It was the kind of defense a lawyer might offer a client they knew was guilty, procedural, obligatory, hollow. "I'm sure he does," Diane agreed, in a tone that suggested the opposite. "It's just that hard work isn't always enough, is it? There's a certain refinement that comes with breeding. With being raised in the right environments." Julian felt something crack inside him, a small fissure in the dam he'd built to hold back 3 years of accumulated humiliation. 3 years of standing silently while Vanessa's family dissected him. 3 years of enduring holiday dinners and birthday parties and charity galas where he was introduced as Vanessa's husband with the same enthusiasm someone might say Vanessa's parking ticket. He told himself it didn't matter. That love was enough. That Vanessa saw something in him her family couldn't, and that eventually, they'd come around. But sitting here now, watching his wife avoid his eyes while her brother smirked and her parents passed judgment, Julian felt the truth settling over him like ash. Vanessa had never defended him because she'd never really disagreed with them. The appetizer course ended. The waiter returned, removing plates with that same curious deference, his movements around Julian just slightly more careful, more attentive than with the others. Julian noticed, but said nothing. The second course arrived, duck breast with some kind of reduction that looked like art on the plate. Richard ordered another scotch. Diane complimented the ambience. Trevor checked his phone ostentatiously, making sure everyone saw the flood of messages he was receiving, each notification a small proof of his importance. And Vanessa? Vanessa just sat there, sipping her champagne, laughing at her family's jokes, and pretending the man beside her wasn't slowly disappearing. "So, Julian." Richard set down his fork, giving Julian his full attention in that way powerful people do when they're about to deliver a kill shot. "Vanessa mentioned you two have been talking about buying a house." Julian's throat went dry. They had talked about it, once, briefly, in bed late at night when Vanessa had been soft and drowsy and had whispered about wanting a place that was theirs. He'd held her close and promised they'd figure it out. He should have known she'd tell her father. "We've discussed it," Julian said carefully. "Discussed it?" Richard smiled. "That's prudent. Given your financial situation, it's probably wise to just discuss it for now. Maybe in 5-10 years, you'll be in a position to actually do something about it." He leaned back, swirling his scotch. "Of course, if Vanessa ever needs help, real help, she knows her family is here. We take care of our own." The implication was clear: you're not one of us. Julian felt Vanessa's hand slide into his under the table, not comforting, not supportive, but gripping his fingers in a silent plea, "Don't make this worse. Don't embarrass me. Just smile and take it." So he did. He smiled, and he took it, and he felt something fundamental shift inside him. A decision crystallizing. A resolve forming in the space where hope used to live. "I appreciate that, sir," Julian said, his voice so calm it surprised even him. Richard nodded, satisfied, and returned to his duck. But across the table, Julian caught the waiter's eye again. The young man was standing near the kitchen door, partially hidden by shadow, and he was looking at Julian with something that might have been pity or might have been understanding. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, and slipped back into the kitchen. Julian's own phone buzzed in his pocket. Vanessa felt it too, pressed against his leg. She shot him a warning look, "Don't you dare check that right now," but Julian was already tired of taking orders. He pulled out his phone under the table, glanced at the screen. The message was from an unknown number. "Mr. Thorne, just wanted to confirm, are you comfortable? Do you need anything? The staff is here to serve you however you prefer." Julian stared at those words, his heart rate picking up. Then a second message, "We didn't realize you were dining here tonight, sir. Just say the word and we'll make sure your evening improves." He looked up slowly, scanning the room. The waiter was watching him from the kitchen doorway. When their eyes met, the young man gave a barely perceptible nod. Understanding crashed over Julian like cold water. They knew. The staff knew exactly who he was. And they were waiting for his signal. Julian slipped his phone back into his pocket, his hand steadier than they'd been all night. Vanessa was watching him with narrowed eyes, suspicious of the small smile that had appeared on his face, the first genuine expression he'd worn since they'd arrived. "What's so funny?" she hissed under her breath. "Nothing," Julian said. "Just a message from work." "Work?" She made it sound like a dirty word. "Can you please just focus on being present? This is important to me." "This." "Not you're important to me. Just this. This performance, this tableau, this demonstration for her family that she'd made the best of a bad situation." The main course arrived, Wagyu beef so tender it barely needed a knife, accompanied by sides that Julian couldn't name but that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget. At least, more than the grocery budget he pretended to have. "Exquisite," Diane murmured, closing her eyes as she tasted the beef. "Absolutely exquisite. Richard, darling, we should come here more often." "It is exceptional," Richard agreed. "Though I have to say, I'm surprised you chose this place, Vanessa. Seems a bit." He glanced at Julian. "Ambitious for the occasion." Vanessa's cheeks flushed. "I thought it would be nice. A special evening." "Oh, it is," Trevor said, grinning. "I'm just wondering how the bill's going to get split. Unless Dad's covering it." He looked at his father expectantly. Richard waved a hand. Of course, of course. Can't have my daughter worrying about money." The unspoken addendum, since her husband certainly can't provide. Julian cut into his beef, the knife sliding through like butter. He'd eaten Wagyu before, better Wagyu than this, actually, at a private dinner in Tokyo with investors who were competing for his attention. But he chewed slowly, savoring not the taste but the irony. These people had no idea who they were talking to. His mind drifted back, as it often did when humiliation pressed too close, to the day he'd met Vanessa. It had been at a charity fundraiser 3.5 years ago, one of those glittering affairs where the wealthy gather to feel good about themselves while writing tax-deductible checks. Julian had attended because one of his business partners insisted it would be good for networking. He'd worn a simple suit, not the designer pieces he could afford, but something understated, forgettable. He'd learned early that invisibility was its own kind of power. Vanessa had been standing by the bar, stunning in a green dress that probably cost what most people paid in rent. She'd looked bored, scanning the room with barely concealed disdain, until her eyes landed on Julian. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she'd said, appearing beside him with a glass of champagne in each hand. She offered him one. "Join the club." He'd smiled, taken the glass. "That obvious? To someone who feels the same way?" "Yeah." She'd studied him with genuine curiosity, a rare thing, he'd later realize, from Vanessa. "You don't look like you belong here." "I don't," he'd said honestly, though not for the reason she assumed. They'd talked for hours that night. She'd told him about her suffocating family, her father's expectations, her mother's constant criticism. She'd said she was tired of men who only saw her last name, her trust fund, her connections. She wanted something real, something raw, something that felt like choosing rather than settling. "I want someone who sees me," she'd said, and Julian had heard the loneliness in her voice, a loneliness that matched his own. He'd thought maybe they could save each other. What he hadn't realized was that Vanessa didn't want to be saved from her family. She wanted to rebel against them just enough to feel independent, but not so much that she actually lost their approval. Julian was supposed to be her romantic act of defiance, the proof that she was her own woman. But defiance only works if you're willing to stand by it when it gets hard. And Vanessa, Julian had learned, preferred comfort to courage. Earth to Julian. Trevor's voice snapped him back to the present. His brother-in-law was staring at him with unconcealed amusement. You zoned out there, buddy? Thinking about work? Or just overwhelmed by the quality of the food? He laughed at his own joke. Bet this is the best meal you've had all year. Julian met his eyes, and for the first time that night, allowed himself a real smile. It's certainly memorable. Something in his tone made Trevor's grin falter, just for a second. You know what I find interesting, Diane said, her voice carrying that particular Upper East Side clip that made everything sound like a backhanded compliment, is how some people are content with so little. They work their small jobs, live in their small apartments, and they're perfectly happy. She looked at Julian with something almost like compassion. There's a certain nobility in knowing your place. Vanessa coughed, reached for her water. Mom. What? I'm not being unkind. I'm simply observing that not everyone has ambition, and that's fine. The world needs. She waved her hand vaguely. All sorts. Julian felt his phone buzz again. He ignored it this time, but he could feel its weight in his pocket like a loaded gun. One text. That's all it would take. One message to the manager, and this entire evening would pivot on its axis. But something held him back. Not fear, he was done with fear. Something else. Curiosity, maybe. A desire to see exactly how far they would go. How much Vanessa would tolerate before she finally stood up for him. If she ever would. I think Julian has plenty of ambition, Vanessa said, but her voice was small, uncertain. He works hard. Oh, I'm sure he does, sweetheart. Richard sipped his scotch. But there's working hard, and then there's working smart. There's a reason some people end up running companies while others end up running errands for companies. His eyes fixed on Julian. It's about vision. Strategy. Knowing how to leverage opportunities. And having the capital to leverage in the first place, Trevor added. Can't exactly play the market if you're living paycheck to paycheck. Julian set down his fork very carefully. That's true, he said quietly. Capital is important. Exactly. Trevor pointed at him like he'd just won a debate. See, you get it. That's why guys like you, and no offense, stay where you are. You don't have the resources to take risks. You're trapped in the safe play. The safe play, Julian repeated, tasting the words. Vanessa's hand was back on his thigh, gripping hard enough to bruise. Please don't, her touch said. Please just let it go. He covered her hand with his, felt her relax slightly. Then he squeezed back, harder than she'd expect, firm enough to make her look at him, and removed her hand from his leg. Her eyes widened. Actually, Julian said, his voice still calm but carrying a new edge, I've taken quite a few risks in my life. Some of them worked out better than others. Richard raised an eyebrow. Oh? Do tell. Dad, Vanessa started. No, I'm curious. Richard leaned forward. What kind of risks? Buying a lottery ticket? Switching jobs? The table laughed. Even Vanessa cracked a smile, though it looked painful. Julian felt something inside him finally, irreversibly break. Not shatter, breaking implied pieces that could be reassembled. This was more like ice melting, revealing something that had been frozen beneath. Something cold and patient and done with pretending. Well, Julian said slowly, there was the time I invested everything I had into a startup that everyone said would fail. Trevor snorted. Let me guess, it did fail. Actually, it was acquired by Google 18 months later for about $300 million. The laughter died. Julian took a sip of his wine, let them process that. My share was modest. Only about $47 million. But it was enough to make some other investments. Real estate, mostly. A few tech companies. Some art. He smiled. I've developed quite a taste for modern art, actually. There's a Rothko I've had my eye on. Vanessa had gone pale. Julian, what are you? Then there was the risk of staying quiet. He looked at each of them in turn, Richard, Diane, Trevor, and finally Vanessa. That was probably the biggest risk of all. Letting people underestimate me. Letting my wife tell me to stay silent at dinners like this. Sitting here while her family treats me like I'm lucky to breathe the same air. His voice never rose above conversational, but every word landed like a stone in still water. That risk? I'm not sure it paid off. Richard's face had turned the color of the wine in his glass. If this is some kind of joke. It's not. Julian pulled out his phone, tapped a few buttons, and turned the screen toward Richard. That's my investment portfolio. Feel free to scroll. Those are my properties. That's my stake in 6 different companies, 3 of which you probably use every day. Trevor grabbed for the phone, squinted at the screen. His face went slack. This can't be real. It's real. Julian took the phone back. You know what else is real? The fact that I've sat through 3 years of this. 3 years of being treated like a charity case at Christmas dinner. 3 years of watching my wife choose her family's approval over her husband's dignity. He looked at Vanessa, and she flinched from what she saw in his eyes. 3 years of hoping she'd finally tell them to stop. Julian. Vanessa's voice cracked. You never said anything. You never told me. Told you what? That I was tired of being humiliated? That I needed you to stand up for me? He laughed, the sound hollow. I shouldn't have had to ask, Vanessa. That's what people who love each other do. They protect each other. They defend each other. Even when, especially when, it costs them something. The waiter appeared at the table, that same young man who'd recognized Julian from the start. He stood there with his hands clasped, waiting. Mr. Thorne, he said quietly. Is everything satisfactory? The title, Mr. Thorne, not sir, not excuse me, hung in the air like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Richard's head snapped toward the waiter. What did you just call him? The waiter looked confused. Mr. Thorne, sir. I apologize if I... Why are you calling him that? The waiter glanced at Julian, uncertainty flickering across his face. Julian gave him a slight nod, and relief flooded the young man's features. Because Mr. Thorne owns the building, sir. This restaurant, the 3 floors of offices above it, and the investment firm across the street. He's been one of our most valued landlords for the past 5 years. The waiter smiled, genuine and warm. The staff was informed of his presence this evening, and we wanted to ensure his experience was perfect. Diane dropped her fork. It clattered against the plate like a gunshot. Trevor just stared, his mouth slightly open. Richard looked like someone had struck him in the chest. And Vanessa looked at Julian like she was seeing a ghost. Or maybe like she was seeing him for the first time. You? She struggled for words. You own this place? The building, Julian corrected. Not the restaurant itself, though I do have a stake in it. The chef is a friend. I invested in her when she was just starting out. He stood, straightened his department store jacket. She's done quite well. I'm proud of her. He pulled out his wallet, a simple leather billfold, worn at the edges, and withdrew a black credit card that caught the light like oil on water. Dinner's on me tonight, he said, handing the card to the waiter. And please add a 30% gratuity for the entire staff. They've been exceptional, as always. Of course, Mr. Thorne. Thank you, sir. Julian looked down at Vanessa, at her beautiful, pale face, at the tears starting to form in her eyes, and felt nothing but exhaustion. I'm going to go now. You should stay. Enjoy dessert with your family. I hear the chocolate soufflé is incredible. Julian, wait, she grabbed his hand. Please. Let's talk about this. Talk. He pulled his hand free gently. You told me not to speak tonight, remember? You said I'd embarrass you. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Turns out, the only embarrassing thing here was how little you thought of me. He walked away from the table, his footsteps steady, his head high. Behind him, he heard Vanessa start to cry. He heard Richard curse under his breath. He heard Trevor say, "Holy shit," about 6 times in rapid succession. And he heard Diane, in a small, shaken voice, ask, "Richard, did we just?" Julian didn't stay to hear the rest. He pushed through the restaurant, past the other diners who'd been pretending not to watch, past the hostess who gave him a sympathetic smile, and out into the cool night air. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer, "Saw your location. Everything okay? Need me to prepare anything?" Another text, this one from his business partner, "Just heard from the restaurant manager. Want me to handle the fallout?" And a third, from someone he hadn't expected, Maya Chen, a woman he'd met at a conference 6 months ago. An architect. Brilliant, funny, and one of the few people who treated him like a person rather than Vanessa's questionable life choice. They'd stayed in touch, casual messages about art and philosophy and the strange loneliness of success. Her text said, "I don't know what happened tonight, but I'm thinking of you. Coffee tomorrow if you need to talk." Julian stood on the sidewalk, the city moving around him like a river around a stone, and he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope that Vanessa would change, that her family would accept him, that silence and patience would eventually be rewarded. Real hope. Clean hope. The kind that comes from finally admitting the truth and choosing to move forward anyway. He typed back to Maya, "Coffee sounds perfect." Then he turned off his phone, hailed a cab, and went home to an apartment that had never felt like home because Vanessa had always hated it, had always seen it as temporary, as beneath her, as something to escape. Tonight, for the first time, Julian saw it differently. Not as a prison. As a beginning. If you're still with me, drop a comment letting me know how you're feeling right now. This story is about to take some turns you won't see coming, and I want to know, are you rooting for Julian? Do you think he made the right choice? Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Trust me, you're going to want to see where this goes. The apartment was dark when Julian arrived, which made sense since Vanessa was still at the restaurant, probably fielding questions from her family about how she'd managed to marry a secret millionaire without knowing it. The thought should have given him satisfaction. Instead, it just made him tired. He dropped his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and stood in the kitchen he'd secretly bought 2 years ago when Vanessa was visiting her parents. This entire building, actually. 20 units. Good investment, terrible personal choice. He'd planned to surprise her with it once they were ready to start a family, to reveal that they didn't need her father's money, that Julian could provide everything she wanted and more. But there was always a reason to wait. Always another dinner to endure, another comment to swallow, another test of his patience. Vanessa kept saying her family would come around, that they just needed time to adjust. 3 years, and all they'd adjusted to was having a convenient target for their contempt. His phone buzzed incessantly, he'd turned off the ringer but not the vibrations. 23 missed calls from Vanessa. 15 texts. 3 voicemails he wouldn't listen to. He poured himself a scotch, Macallan 25, a bottle he kept hidden in the back of a cabinet because Vanessa once mentioned it was show-offy to drink expensive liquor, and stood by the window looking out at the city that had made him rich and desperately lonely. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd grown up poor, truly poor, the kind of poverty that meant government cheese and second-hand shoes with holes in the soles. His mother had worked 3 jobs and still couldn't always keep the lights on. He'd watched her humiliate herself asking landlords for extensions, seen her cry over bills she couldn't pay, heard her apologize to him for not being able to afford things other kids had. "You're going to be different," she'd told him once, her hands raw from cleaning other people's houses. "You're smart, Julian. You're going to get out of this." And he had. Scholarships, student loans, a computer science degree earned while working 40 hours a week. Then that first startup, the one everyone said was doomed, the one that changed everything. By 32, he had more money than he knew what to do with. By 35, he'd built an empire that operated so quietly most people didn't know his name. And by 38, married to a woman who came from everything he'd never had, he'd learned that poverty and wealth were both just different flavors of loneliness. The door burst open. Vanessa stood there, mascara streaked, breathing hard like she'd run up the stairs despite the perfectly functional elevator. You left, she said, her voice breaking. You left me there. Julian turned from the window. You told me not to speak. I was just following orders. That's not fair. Isn't it? He sipped his scotch, savored the burn. What part isn't fair, Vanessa? The part where I spent 3 years being treated like an embarrassment. The part where you never once told your family to stop. Or the part where I finally had enough and walked away. She stepped inside, closed the door. Her expensive shoes, Louboutin, red soles, a gift from her mother, clicked on the hardwood he'd personally selected. You should have told me. About the money. About everything. Why? The question hung between them. So you could what? Defend me? Suddenly I'm worth defending if I'm rich. That's not, she stopped, closed her eyes. I didn't know, Julian. You have to understand, I thought. You thought I was poor. Struggling. Beneath you. He set down his glass. And you married me anyway, which I actually respected. I thought it meant you saw past the money, that you loved me for who I was. He laughed, the sound brittle. Turns out, you just loved the idea of slumming it. The rebellious daughter marrying the poor guy to prove a point. Except you never actually committed to the rebellion. You wanted credit for being brave without any of the consequences. Vanessa flinched like he'd slapped her. That's not true. Then why didn't you defend me? Even once, Vanessa. Just once, you could have told your father to shut up. Told your brother to stop. Told your mother that I wasn't a charity case. But you didn't. You sat there, laughing at their jokes, apologizing for me, making excuses. His voice cracked. Do you know how that feels? Watching the person you love choose everyone else over you, every single time. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was trying to keep the peace. My family is complicated. Everyone's family is complicated. That's not an excuse. I love you. She moved closer, reaching for him. Julian, I love you. I know I messed up. I know I should have been stronger, should have stood up for you more, but I was scared. My father, he controls everything. The money, the family business, my trust fund. If I go against him, you lose your safety net, Julian finished. I get it. But here's the thing, Vanessa. I could have been your safety net. was your safety net. You just never bothered to look down and notice I was there, holding you up. She was crying openly now, shoulders shaking. Please. Please don't do this. We can fix this. I'll be better. I'll tell them to stop. You'll what? Finally defend me now that you know I'm rich. Now that it's socially acceptable. He shook his head. That's not how love works. I needed you to stand by me when I was nobody. When it cost you something. When your family was breathing down your neck. That's when it mattered. I'm sorry. Her voice was barely a whisper. God, Julian, I'm so sorry. He believed her. That was the worst part. He could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, the dawning realization of what she'd let happen, what she'd participated in. But remorse wasn't the same as change, and apologies didn't erase 3 years of accumulated wounds. I know you are, he said softly. I'm sorry too. Don't say that. She grabbed his hands, held them against her chest. Don't say it like that. Like it's over. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can? Vanessa. He pulled his hands free. It is over. It's been over. I just didn't want to admit it. She sank onto the couch, their couch, though she'd picked it out and he'd just nodded along, and buried her face in her hands. What do I tell them? My family. They're already calling. They want to know if it's true. If you're really, how much? Tell them the truth. Julian picked up his scotch, finished it. Tell them you married a man you didn't bother to know, and you lost him because you loved their approval more than his dignity. Julian. I'm going to stay at a hotel tonight. Tomorrow, I'll have my lawyer contact you about the separation. The word landed like a physical blow. Vanessa's head snapped up. Separation? You mean divorce? I mean, I don't know yet. But I know I can't stay here. Not tonight. Not until. He paused, searching for honesty. Not until I figure out if there's anything left worth saving. He walked to the bedroom, grabbed an overnight bag, threw in some clothes. Vanessa followed him, hovering in the doorway, her presence a weight he could feel without looking. I love you, she said again, desperate. I do. I know I don't deserve you. I know I've been weak and selfish and horrible. But I love you. Julian zipped the bag, turned to face her. For a moment, he saw the woman he'd fallen for at that charity fundraiser, beautiful, lonely, searching for something real. But that woman had been a story she told herself, a character she played when rebellion seemed romantic. The real Vanessa was standing in front of him now, scared, dependent, unable to choose between the life she wanted and the approval she needed. I loved you too, he said. Past tense. The words hung in the air between them. Then he left. The hotel was expensive, anonymous, the kind of place where they didn't ask questions and brought you bourbon at 2 a.m. without judgment. Julian sat on the bed, staring at his phone, watching the messages pile up. Vanessa, please come home. Vanessa, I'll do anything. Vanessa, I can't sleep. Richard, we need to talk. Call me. Trevor, dude, what the hell? And from Diane, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We should discuss this like adults. He deleted all of them except one. Maya's text still sat there, simple and kind, coffee sounds perfect. He stared at those 3 words for a long time. He barely knew Maya Chen. They talked at a conference, exchanged numbers, sent occasional messages about architecture and art. She'd mentioned being divorced, something about growing apart, and he'd appreciated her honesty. There'd been no flirtation, no suggestion of anything beyond friendship. But sitting here now, exhausted and raw and free for the first time in years, Julian felt a pull toward that coffee invitation. Toward the possibility of talking to someone who didn't need anything from him, who didn't have expectations or judgments or family approval hanging over every word. Someone who just saw him. He typed back, *, tomorrow morning? There's a place in the village that makes decent espresso. My treat. *. Her response came quickly, *, your treat? Big spender. Must have gotten a raise. *. Despite everything, he smiled. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams of drowning in expensive restaurants while Vanessa's family watched from their table, sipping wine and discussing his technique. He woke at 6, showered until the water ran cold, and dressed in jeans and a sweater, clothes he never wore around Vanessa because she said they made him look too casual. Clothes that felt like his own skin. The coffee shop was tucked between a bookstore and a record shop, the kind of place that had been there since the 70s and would probably survive the apocalypse. Maya was already sitting at a corner table when he arrived, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a paint-stained NYU sweatshirt and reading a paperback. She looked up when he approached, her smile warm and uncomplicated. You look different. Different how? Lighter. She gestured to the seat across from her. Sit. Tell me everything. Or nothing. Whatever you need. He Saturday. Ordered a double espresso when the waiter came by. And then, because Maya's eyes were kind and patient and because he'd been silent for so long, he told her. Everything. The dinner. The humiliation. The reveal. The 3 years of accumulated shame. His childhood poverty. His mother's sacrifices. The startup success. The strange isolation of being rich and invisible. Vanessa's cowardice. His own complicity in staying silent for so long. Maya listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from surprise to anger to something that looked like understanding. When he finally finished, she sat back and sipped her coffee. That's a lot. Yeah. You know what strikes me most about your story? What? You spent 3 years waiting for permission to be yourself. She traced the rim of her cup. Permission from your wife. Permission from her family. Permission from people who never bothered to ask who you really were. And the saddest part is you're brilliant at building companies, at making money, at seeing opportunities everyone else misses, but you couldn't see the most obvious truth. Which is? You never needed their permission. She leaned forward. Julian, you married someone who made you smaller. Who made you feel like the best parts of yourself, your intelligence, your success, your strength, were things to be hidden and ashamed of. That's not love. That's a cage. The words hit him square in the chest. I thought if I just waited long enough, she'd change? Her family would change. Maya shook her head. People don't change because we wait patiently. They change because consequences force them to. You know what last night was? A disaster. A gift. She smiled. You gave yourself permission to be seen. Finally. And yes, it exploded your marriage, but honestly? Your marriage was already dead. You just hadn't buried it yet. Julian stared at her, this woman he barely knew, and felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but opening. Like a door he'd forgotten was there. I don't know what to do next, he admitted. That's okay. You don't have to know. You just have to stop hiding. She reached across the table, squeezed his hand briefly, then let go. The world is full of people who will see you, Julian. Who will celebrate your success instead of resenting it. Who will stand beside you instead of making you kneel. But you have to let them in first. They talked for 2 more hours. About her divorce, about the architecture firm she'd started with nothing but ambition and a loan. About the art she loved, the city she'd grown up in, the fear of starting over at 43. About loneliness and courage and the strange gravity of other people's expectations. When they finally left the coffee shop, the city was fully awake, streaming with people pursuing their own complicated lives. Thank you, Julian said. For listening. Thank you for trusting me. Maya pulled on her jacket. Same time next week. I'd like that. She smiled, started to walk away, then turned back. Julian? For what it's worth. I think you're going to be just fine. He watched her disappear into the crowd, and for the first time since the restaurant, he believed it might be true. The next week was a blur of lawyer meetings, paperwork, and increasingly desperate messages from Vanessa. She wanted to meet. To talk. To explain. Her family wanted to apologize, Richard's words, delivered through Vanessa, which somehow made them worse. Julian ignored most of it. He had his lawyer handle the separation logistics, moved his clothes out of the apartment to a temporary rental in Tribeca, and tried to figure out what he wanted his life to look like now that he wasn't performing for an audience that hated him. Work helped. He'd always loved work, the clean logic of building companies, the satisfaction of seeing an idea become reality. His business partner, David, met him for lunch on Thursday. You seem different, David said, echoing Maya's observation. I feel different. Good different or about to make questionable life choices different? Julian laughed. Both, probably. David pushed his pasta around his plate. For what it's worth, I never liked Vanessa. She made you apologize for being successful. That's not partnership, that's sabotage. You never said anything. You didn't want to hear it. David shrugged. You were in love. Or you thought you were. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Julian thought about that. Had he loved Vanessa, or had he loved the idea of being enough for someone from her world? Had he loved her, or had he been trying to prove to himself that his childhood poverty didn't define him? The distinction mattered more than he'd realized. I'm thinking about making some changes, Julian said. Taking a more visible role in the company. Maybe doing some speaking engagements. I've been hiding for too long. David's face lit up. Hell yes. We've been trying to get you to do that for years. You're a better speaker than I am, and you've got the story, rags to riches, brilliant strategist, the whole package. I don't want to be a sob story. You're not. You're an inspiration. There's a difference. David leaned forward. Look, you built this empire by being invisible. That worked. But maybe it's time to try something new. Let people see what you've accomplished. Own it. Own it. The phrase echoed in Julian's head for the rest of the day. He'd spent so long downplaying his success, first because he wanted to fit in with Vanessa's world, then because her family made him feel like wealth was something to apologize for, at least, wealth that came from his own effort rather than inheritance. But Maya was right. David was right. He'd earned every dollar, every company, every achievement. And he was done apologizing for it. The second coffee with Maya happened naturally, then a third, then dinner at a small Italian place in Brooklyn where the chef recognized Julian and sent out complimentary courses. Maya raised an eyebrow. "You're secretly famous, aren't you? Just invested in his first restaurant. He's done well since then." "Of course you did." But she was smiling, not resentful. "You're like a guardian angel for entrepreneurs. I just see potential where other people see risk. That's a gift." She sipped her wine. "Not just for business. For life." They talked about everything and nothing. She showed him sketches of a building she was designing for a non-profit. He told her about a tech startup he was considering funding. They debated the merits of modern architecture, laughed about terrible first apartments, and somehow ended up discussing the philosophy of happiness. "I think we spend too much time trying to be happy," Maya said. "Like it's this destination we're supposed to reach. But maybe happiness is just what happens when you stop performing for other people and start living for yourself." "When did you figure that out?" "About 6 months into my divorce. I spent the first 6 months crying. The second 6 months angry. And then one day I woke up and realized I wasn't sad anymore. I was just free." She met his eyes. "It's terrifying. But it's also the best feeling in the world." Julian felt something shift between them, not romantic, not yet, but a recognition. They were both standing in the rubble of failed marriages, both rebuilding themselves from scratch, both learning to be seen. "I'm not ready," he said suddenly. "For anything. I mean, I like spending time with you. But I'm still married. Still healing. Still figuring out who you are without someone else's voice in your head." Maya smiled. "I know. Me too. That's what makes this easy. This friendship. No expectations. No performance. Just two people who've been through the fire and are trying to remember what they look like without the burns." Relief flooded through him. "I'd like that." "Good. Because I make an excellent friend. I'm loyal, I bake decent cookies, and I never judge your Netflix choices. Even reality TV. Especially reality TV. Sometimes you need to watch people make terrible decisions so you feel better about your own." They laughed, and it felt easy. Natural. Like breathing after being underwater too long. Vanessa finally cornered him 3 weeks later at the apartment while he was collecting the last of his belongings. She'd been crying, her eyes were swollen, her hair unwashed, and she looked nothing like the polished woman who dug her nails into his hand at that restaurant. "Please," she said. "Please just talk to me." Julian set down the box of books he'd been packing. "Okay. Talk. I'm sorry. I've said it 100 times, but I need you to really hear it. I'm sorry for everything. For my family. For not defending you. For making you feel small." She stepped closer. "I talked to them. I told them they were wrong, that they need to apologize, that if they can't respect you, they can't be part of my life." "And what did they say?" She looked away. "They think I'm overreacting. That you're being sensitive. That if you really loved me, you'd understand." "Understand what?" "That they have the right to humiliate me. That I should be grateful they tolerated my presence." Julian shook his head. "Do you hear yourself, Vanessa? Even now, you're making excuses for them." "I'm not. They're my family. It's complicated." "It's really not." He picked up the box again. "Either you choose me or you choose them. You can't have both. Not anymore. That's not fair. You're asking me to cut off my entire family. I'm asking you to stand up for your husband. That's what marriage is supposed to be. Partnership. Having each other's backs. But you can't even do that without qualifications and conditions and excuses. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you. I know. I believe you. But love isn't enough if it's not backed up by action. By courage. By willingness to lose something to protect what matters. He headed for the door. You love me, Vanessa, but you love your family's approval more. And I finally love myself enough to not accept being someone's second choice. Julian. I'll have my lawyer send the divorce papers next week. The word, divorce, not separation, made her gasp. You can't mean that. I do. And standing there, looking at this woman he'd built his life around, Julian felt nothing but sadness and relief. The anger had burned out, leaving only clarity. I hope you figure it out. I hope you learn to stand up for yourself, for what you believe in, for the people you love. But I can't wait around hoping you'll choose me anymore. He left her crying in their apartment that wasn't really theirs, that he'd bought secretly as a surprise that would never be revealed, and he felt lighter with each step. 6 months later, Julian stood on a stage in front of 500 entrepreneurs, investors, and business students, telling his story. Not the sanitized version. Not the humble brag tale of startups and acquisitions. The real story: poverty, struggle, luck, hard work, and the strange loneliness of success. He talked about hiding who he was, about marrying someone who made him feel like his achievements were shameful, about the dinner that changed everything. I spent years making myself smaller, he told the audience. Quieter. More palatable. Because I thought that's what I needed to do to be loved. To fit in. To belong. He paused, letting the word settle. But here's what I learned: you can't belong somewhere that requires you to abandon yourself. Real belonging comes from finding people who see you, all of you, and celebrate it. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, during the networking reception, Maya found him by the bar. She was wearing a green dress, not unlike the one Vanessa had worn the night they met, but somehow completely different. It looked like her, like confidence and creativity and earned success. You were amazing, she said. I was terrified. It didn't show. She handed him a champagne flute. To new beginnings. He clinked his glass against hers. To being seen. They drank, and Julian felt something he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Not just happiness, but rightness. Like all the pieces of his life were finally arranging themselves into a picture he could recognize. So, Maya said, her eye sparkling with something that wasn't quite friendship anymore, I have a question. Yeah? Are you ready yet? He knew what she was asking. In the past 6 months, they'd become inseparable: coffee every week, dinners several times a month, long walks through the city where they talked about everything. She'd shown him her world, and he'd shown her his, and somewhere along the way, friendship had deepened into something more. But they'd both been careful. Both been healing. I think I might be, Julian said slowly. But I need you to know, I'm probably going to be terrible at this. I'm going to overthink everything. I'm going to have moments where I remember being humiliated and I'll need reassurance. I'm going to. Maya pressed her finger to his lips. Julian. I know. I'm going to have those moments too. That's what happens when you've been broken. You heal crooked. She smiled. But maybe we can be crooked together. Crooked together, he repeated, and then he was kissing her, right there in the middle of the reception with 500 people milling around, and it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been before. When they finally broke apart, both laughing, Maya rested her forehead against his. For the record, she whispered, I've been ready for months. I was just waiting for you to catch up. Sorry for making you wait. Worth it. She pulled back, her eyes serious. But Julian? Promise me something. Anything. Don't hide again. Not your success, not your brilliance, not any part of yourself. The world needs to see you. I need to see you. All of you. Deal. Deal. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that dinner. Vanessa didn't contest it. She'd finally realized that some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired with apologies and promises. She sent him one final message: I hope you're happy. You deserve it. I'm sorry I couldn't be the person you needed. He sent back, "I hope you learn to be the person you need. Take care of yourself, Vanessa." And that was it. 3 years of marriage reduced to 2 text messages and a signature on legal documents. Richard tried to reach out once, through his lawyer, suggesting Julian might want to reconsider given certain financial entanglements. Julian's lawyer sent back a polite but firm message: there were no financial entanglements. Vanessa had signed a prenup before the wedding, one of the few smart things Julian had insisted on, back when he was still hiding his wealth. She'd get nothing beyond what she'd brought into the marriage. The Carringtons learned, too late, that underestimating Julian had cost them the chance to be part of something extraordinary. Julian, for his part, felt nothing but relief. A year after that dinner, Julian and Maya stood in the Brooklyn brownstone they'd bought together, her architecture, his financing, their home. It was full of light and art and the kind of warmth that comes from being truly seen. "I have something for you," Maya said one Saturday morning, handing him a small wrapped package. He opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph, not of them, but of that coffee shop where they'd first really talked. She'd sketched it by hand, capturing the way morning light fell through the windows, the intimacy of their corner table. At the bottom, she'd written, "*, where we both stopped hiding." *. Julian felt his eyes burn. "Maya, I love you," she said simply. "Not because you're successful or wealthy or any of that. I love you because you're kind and brilliant and brave enough to walk away from people who made you small. I love you because you see people's potential the way other people see problems. I love you because you're you. I love you too." He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and paint and home. "Thank you." "For what?" "For waiting. For being patient. For not needing me to be anything except myself." She smiled against his chest. "That's the easy part. You're pretty great when you're yourself." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and the life they'd built, not despite their brokenness, but because of it. Because they'd both learned that being shattered and rebuilt meant you got to choose what shape you took the second time around. "Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Seriously, a full hour. That's a gift of your time I don't take lightly. I want to know what you thought. Drop a comment telling me which part hit you the hardest. Are you Team Julian? Do you think Vanessa deserved another chance? Where are you watching from right now? Are you at home, on a break, lying in bed thinking about your own life? If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your life who see you versus the ones who make you smaller, please hit that subscribe button. These stories matter because they remind us that we all deserve to be seen, celebrated, and loved for exactly who we are. Until next time, stay strong, stay true to yourself, and never let anyone make you apologize for being extraordinary. 2 years later, Julian got an invitation in the mail. Trevor was getting married to a woman whose father owned a hedge fund, because of course he was, and apparently Julian made the guest list. The note inside was brief: "It would mean a lot if you could come. Tea." Julian showed it to Maya over breakfast. She read it, raised an eyebrow. "Are you going?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me never wants to see those people again." "What does your gut say?" He thought about it. The truth was, he'd healed. The wounds the Carringtons had inflicted had scarred over, and while he'd never forget, he also didn't feel the rage anymore. Just distance. The kind of distance that comes from building a life so full and rich and authentic that the past loses its power. "I think I'll go," he said finally. "Not for them. For me. To prove I can walk into that room and feel nothing but peace." Maya squeezed his hand. "Want me to come with you?" "You do that?" "Julian, I'd do anything for you. You know that." So they went. The wedding was predictably extravagant: a country club, ice sculptures, a band that probably cost more than most people's cars. Richard and Diane were there, older and somehow smaller than Julian remembered. They saw him arrive, saw Maya on his arm looking stunning and successful and completely at ease, and something flickered in their eyes. Regret, maybe. Or just the recognition of a massive miscalculation. Trevor approached during cocktail hour, nervous in a way Julian had never seen him. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure you would. Congratulations on your wedding." "Yeah. Thanks." Trevor glanced at Maya, then back to Julian. Look, I owe you an apology. A real one. The way we treated you, the way I treated you, it was unforgivable. I was a complete ass. Julian studied him. The cocky smugness was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. Why now? Because I've spent 2 years watching your success. Seeing your name in Forbes, watching you speak at conferences, reading about your investments. And I realized, Trevor's voice cracked slightly. I realized we had a chance to know someone extraordinary, and we blew it because we were too arrogant to see past our own bullshit. Trevor. Let me finish. Please. He took a breath. My sister, she's not doing well. She won't admit it, but losing you broke something in her. She's been through 3 therapists, and she still can't figure out how to stand up to mom and dad. And watching her struggle, I finally understood what you were asking for. What you deserved. It wasn't about the money. It was about being seen. Being valued. And we failed you. Julian felt Maya's hand tighten in his support, solidarity, strength. I appreciate you saying that, Julian said carefully. I do. But you should know, I'm not here looking for closure or revenge or validation. I'm here because I'm genuinely happy for you, and because I don't carry anger anymore. You should. We deserve it. Maybe. But anger is exhausting, and I'm too busy being happy. He smiled, genuine and free. I hope your marriage is everything mine wasn't. I hope you treat your wife like she's the most important person in every room. And I hope you never make her choose between you and anything else. Trevor nodded, his eyes wet. Thank you. For coming. For this. They shook hands, and Julian felt the last piece of his old life click into place and then release, like a puzzle finally completed and then set aside. Vanessa found him later, during the reception. She looked beautiful, she'd always looked beautiful, but there was a fragility in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Julian. Her voice was soft. I heard you were here. I wanted to. I needed to see you. Maya started to step away, but Julian kept her hand in his. This is Maya. My partner. Vanessa's eyes flickered with pain, but she smiled bravely. It's nice to meet you. Julian's very lucky. We both are, Maya said kindly. Vanessa turned back to Julian. You look happy. Really happy. I am. Good. That's good. She twisted her hands together. I've been in therapy. Working on myself. Trying to figure out why I couldn't be what you needed. Vanessa. No, let me say this. You were right about everything. I was weak. I chose my family's approval over your dignity, and I lost the best thing that ever happened to me because of it. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I know it's too late. I know you've moved on. But I needed you to know, I see it now. All of it. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Julian felt something in his chest, not love, not longing, but compassion. She was trying. Maybe too late, maybe for the wrong reasons, but she was trying. I forgive you, he said, and meant it. I hope you find someone who brings out your courage instead of your fear. You deserve that. So did you? She wiped her eyes. Looks like you found it. She walked away, back into the crowd of people who still defined her life, and Julian turned to Maya. You okay? She asked. Yeah. I really am. They danced later, swaying to music under lights that were supposed to be romantic but just felt expensive. And Julian realized something. He'd spent years chasing acceptance from people who could never give it, and in the process, he'd almost missed the person who'd been willing to offer it freely. What are you thinking? Maya murmured against his shoulder. That I'm glad I walked away from that dinner. Me too. She pulled back to look at him. Though I do have one question. What's that? Next time someone tries to make you stay quiet, whether it's family or colleagues or anyone, what are you going to do? Julian grinned. Speak up immediately. Loudly. With evidence and zero patience for bullshit. That's my guy. She kissed him, soft and sure. Never hide again, Okay? Never again, he promised. And he meant it. 5 years later, Julian Thorne stood in front of a different crowd, not entrepreneurs or investors, but students at his old university. The same school where he'd worked 40-hour weeks while earning his degree, where he'd lived on ramen and hope. They'd asked him to give the commencement speech. "You're going to leave here today with degrees and debt and dreams," he told them. "And the world is going to try to tell you who you should be. How big you're allowed to be. What's realistic and what's impossible." He paused, looking out at hundreds of young faces full of potential. "And here's my advice, don't listen." He told them about growing up poor. About his mother's sacrifices. About building a fortune and then hiding it because he thought he needed to be smaller to be loved. About the dinner that changed everything. "Success isn't about the money," he said. "It's about having the courage to be exactly who you are, even when, especially when, people tell you you're too much or not enough. It's about finding people who celebrate your victories instead of resenting them. It's about speaking up when someone tries to silence you." In the audience, Maya sat beside Julian's mother, who was crying quietly, her hand pressed to her heart. Next to them were David and his wife, and a handful of other people Julian had collected over the years, people who saw him, valued him, pushed him to be bigger rather than smaller. His people. His family. The family he'd chosen. "So here's my final piece of advice," Julian said, his voice carrying across the stadium. "If someone tells you to stay quiet, speak louder. If someone makes you feel small, stand taller. If someone doesn't see your worth, find someone who does, or better yet, see it yourself." The applause was deafening. Afterward, as he stood surrounded by students asking questions, taking photos, thanking him for his honesty, Julian felt his phone buzz. A text from an unknown number, *, "Saw your speech online. You were right about everything. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. Be well. Veen *. He read it once, then deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but out of completion. That chapter was closed, and he had no interest in reopening it. Ready to go home. Maya appeared at his elbow, her eyes warm. "Yeah." He took her hand. "Let's go home." They walked out into the sunshine, past banners and proud families and young people on the edge of their lives, and Julian felt nothing but gratitude. For the dinner that broke him open. For the people who put him back together. For the courage to finally speak up. And for the life, rich, full, authentic, loud, that waited on the other side of silence. So there it is. Julian's story. A journey from silence to voice, from hiding to being seen, from choosing people who diminished him to building a life with someone who celebrated him. I want to hear from you one last time. What did you take away from this? Have you ever had to choose between being yourself and being accepted? Have you ever walked away from someone because staying meant losing yourself? Drop a comment, I read every single one. And if you made it all the way through this hour-long journey, you're incredible. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your heart. Subscribe if you haven't already. I pour everything into these stories, and knowing you're out there listening makes it all worthwhile. Remember, you deserve to be seen. You deserve to be celebrated. You deserve to speak up. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Until next time, stay courageous, stay authentic, and never, ever stay quiet when your soul is screaming to be heard. This has been Julian's story. Thank you for being part of it.